Hi everybody, it's Jen. Welcome back to my channel, Hallmark Plus More, where we watch and talk about shows, movies, mysteries, Hallmark ornaments, and anything else that floats our boat. So today I'm going to be reviewing a Hallmark original series called The Way Home, Season 3, Episode 7. So before I get into the review, I just want to say thank you to everybody who likes and watches my videos, subscribes to my channel, leaves me comments. I thank you so much. I love all the comments. I read them all. So getting into this episode, it's definitely exciting, right? Because every episode you want to get your questions answered. And most of the time I'm left with even more questions, right? So the flashback kind of showed you what went on and hopefully what we're going to see this episode. You saw, a flashback of Elliot kissing Emma. You saw Nick there. You saw Casey with Sam. Alice afraid of marrying Max, which was funny because she thinks that's her fate, right? Kate saving Evie and Colton in 1965, and then how the episode ended, they showed that as well, where you see, Kat coming out of the pond crying to Dell, saying that she killed her dad, right? Killed Colton. So that was definitely an emotional scene. You do see a conversation with them in this episode, which I'm glad, because you've probably seen in some of my comments from the last episode, I feel like they need to have that conversation, right? Kat doesn't really have anybody to open up to. And there's actually one part in this episode where, Elliot tells Kat, about kissing Emma. Like throughout the episode, he tries at certain times, and Nick is the best wingman. He's always helpful, saying, I know you need to be with Kat. He even, puts together a whole karaoke night, which I'll talk about later to kind of cheer them up. But even then, when Kat says, I need a friend, she tries to jump in the pond to talk to Susanna. So she doesn't really have a friend to confide in, and she sees that in Susanna. So yes, we love to see her jump back. She interacts with Thomas, but a lot of times she wants to have that friend, and she has that friend in Susanna, which you'll see kind of defends her too when she talks to Jacob. So we saw a little bit of 1974 as well. Alice goes back and sees a young Colton, and you see a young Dell. And, I mentioned briefly you see 1800s, but most of this episode was in 2025, right? Because there's so much going on. You see Sam and Dell, you see Casey, you even see Dell's friend Rita, you see Nick. So there's definitely a lot of, side characters. You see Max Goodwin again. So a lot was going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just kind of going to talk about each time period. So I'll talk a little bit what happened in 74, then I'll talk about the 1800s, and then I'll talk about what happened in 2025, since that seems to be the bulk of the episode. So in 1974, right, we know Alice goes back, and she goes to see Evelyn, and she's still living in the attic, of course. Then she was kind of surprised to see Colton there, right, because she wanted to see Evelyn, but I'm sure she's never, a bad thing to see her grandfather Colton. And Evelyn starts talking about the portrait, the My Catherine portrait, and how she recognizes her. So remember, Alice actually, discovered it with Evelyn and got a little nervous when Evelyn told Alice the first time, I recognize her, right? She was like, I gotta go. So now Alice is back in the attic with Evelyn, and now Colton's there, and she says it again, like, hey, I recognize it. But she wanted to say it in front of Colton because, she didn't recognize it as the woman at Coyle's, oh, that was the woman you were speaking to, the adult version. No, we were right. We thought maybe she recognized it from saving, since Kat, the White Witch, saved her in 1965 when she was little. And we were right. She basically says that, this is the woman who saved me when I almost drowned. And then she says to Colton, like, don't you remember? And it seems like Colton wants to forget or doesn't want to say it in front of Alice because Colton says, no, I saved myself. Like, I saved you, so that was interesting too. I think Alice was coming up in the attic. Evelyn was going to get the portrait out anyways, because I feel like Evelyn was going to show Colton, hey, there's a picture of the My Catherine. This is the woman that saved us that night at the pond. And then Alice came in and Colton's like, no, that's not right. I saved you. So I think Colton either didn't want Alice to know, or Colton's kind of in denial, and not wanting to say anything, but he kind of felt uncomfortable. And then Evie was like, we used to write messages to each other with invisible ink to kind of talk to each other. So that was interesting because remember when they found the hidden door back when they used the Ouija board, Alice said, how did you communicate? Because Evie said to Alice during the Ouija board scene, we used to communicate even though our parents wanted to keep us apart. So Alice was like, well, how did you communicate? And then they saw the hidden door pop open. So I was always curious, what the answer to that question was. And here we have it. Evie confirmed it. We used invisible ink. We would lose, notes on paper, and stick them in trees. And then Alice was like, or in books. And Colton felt uncomfortable, right? And he's like, you know what, I gotta go. Are you leaving, Alice? I can give you a ride home. So it was like, wait a second, how do you know about the invisible ink in books? So maybe the books that they found, that was the first time that Colton attempted to write a note to Evie in a book, because Evie specifically said paper and trees. And when Alice said that, it's almost like it triggered Colton to be like, how do you know that? So I think Alice picked up on it and was like, yeah, you can give me a ride home, you know? So I thought that was interesting, right? Evie didn't notice it, right? But they did. So Alice picked up on it. And in the car, Colton was like, how do you know about the message in books? And, Alice played it off. And Colton was like, well, don't tell Evie about the message in the book. So I don't know if that means things had changed, right? But I don't know if that means that was the only time it was written in a book, or his feelings had changed. Like, hey, I made that message in a book, that was the night I met Dell. So remember, the book message kind of said, I believe in the magic of the pond. Please come back to me and the pond. It's not, I'm not going to blame you. So I think maybe Colton was telling his feelings for Evelyn. But he gave her the book kind of when he met Dell, I thought, maybe not, but I feel like don't tell Evie about the books now, because I feel like Colton had already fallen for Dell. Who knows? And then Colton says, a lot has changed since that night at the Cove, quote unquote. So that is an exact quote from Colton that he tells Alice in the truck. So a lot has changed since that night at the Cove. So that's kind of when I was thinking, about the message in the book, don't tell Evie. Like, I don't believe that anymore, or, I've changed what I thought. It's almost like when you write a letter and mail it, and then you change your mind and you want to get the letter back, right? Because I feel like that's kind of what Colton was saying. Like, don't tell her about it. A lot has changed since the night at the Cove. And it was the day before Adele's birthday, and said, I have something pretty big planned. So that was exciting. And then, Alice leaves and she comes back, and Colton's like, what are you doing here? So, Colton was trying to say goodbye to Dell on her last day. And they only really have a few minutes together. He wants to serenade her with the song. And then Evie shows up and says, yeah, I'm going to take Dell to the train station. So I know some people are like, probably, oh, well, that was mean of Evie. But it wasn't her plan. She's like, I was told I had to take you to the train station. So I don't think Evelyn was like, I'm trying to ruin this beautiful moment you have saying goodbye to Dell. I think she just showed up because she was told she had to send her to the train station. I don't think Evelyn wanted to drive her to the train station. So I don't think she was trying to spoil anything. She obviously didn't know what Colton had planned, but I felt like Colton was rushed. He wanted to serenade her. They really only had like a couple minutes while Evelyn watched. So I think Colton was kind of sad afterwards. And then you see Alice travel to 1974 one more time, and she's comforting Colton, like, it'll be okay. And then a ring box falls out of his pocket, and so Alice was like, "Oh my gosh, is that what your surprise were? Were you going to?" And he says, "quote unquote, time to wake up from the dream." So time to wake up from the dream. So, that could mean a lot of different things. Obviously, what I'm thinking it means is obviously that, the dream was he was going to be with Dell, he was going to propose, she was going to stay. But none of that happened, right? He barely got like one chord off of the guitar before, she left with Evelyn to go back. So that is kind of what it makes you, assume he was talking about. So I don't know, was the dream to be with Dell and to make music? Because we know at one point that was his dream. So there's a couple different questions there, but that's all you really see of 1974. You do see a little bit of the 1800s, so I'm just kind of going to talk about those scenes, and then we'll talk about, Sam and Thomas. So I'm going to talk about Thomas in the 1800s, but I'm also going to talk about Thomas at the end and time traveling with Casey and the time travel as well. So I am kind of going to talk about Thomas again. But when you look at the 1800s, we know from the end of last episode that Jacob stays with Elijah. I kind of anticipated he was going to, because he was really conflicted that whole scene, last episode. So I'm not surprised that he did. And he doesn't really feel like he fits in 2025. He really has that father figure in Elijah. That's, his father to him. And you'll see in this episode, Thomas has always also kind of been that father figure. So that's why if you saw my earlier videos of this season, you might have heard me say it's almost like Thomas is a little bit older than Kat. And the only reason why I say that is, Jacob is Kat's brother. They're not that far apart in age. You know what? He was 8, she was 16. They're what, 9 years apart, and yet Thomas is kind of like a father figure to Jacob, and yet kind of with his sister. But I don't think he's that old. Like I said, that was the only reason why I said it in the past. Like I kind of thought that Thomas was a little too old for Kat, but seeing the way they interact, I mean, age is just a number. So, I mean, no hate comments. I'm not saying anything bad. Judge free zone. I always say comments, all theories are welcome. Just be pleasant and be kind, because I can jump all over the place with my theories. I like all the characters, and my opinions change just like the episodes change, right? You might, I liked Kat and Elliot at the beginning. I'm really starting to like Kat and Thomas now. So, my opinions change as the theories change, as we see the information change in the show. But I do like Kat and Thomas together. I feel like they've grown together. But anyways, that's kind of why I feel that way too, especially in this episode. You really see Thomas kind of mentoring Jacob and kind of being that, listener that Jacob needs, since he's upset with what Kat told him. So being a father figure, that's the only reason why I came up with that. But again, no hate comments. I love everybody. And I always say my videos are a judge free zone. So we talk about anybody and everything. No judgment. We go back and forth. That's okay. So, Elijah's always happy to see Jacob. And, Jacob says, I can stay because I'm safe. And Elijah says, you do need to go back to your time. Cyrus's words are fickle, he says. So, and then right after he says that, you see the knock on the door, and it's Cyrus's men saying, Jacob Landry, you've been summoned. So he has to go back to Lingermore, and it's it's like well, he just said that. Like he just said, I trust what Cyrus said. And then Elijah says, don't trust him. And now he's going to see Cyrus. So that was a little scary. And then you just see the door open and he gets pushed in a room. And it kind of looks like the attic, which we, later find out he was in the attic. He gets pushed in the attic. He sees Susanna. As soon as he sees Susanna, he lights up. And I'm like, oh, that's wonderful. Susanna is the one who summoned you. And then a couple of seconds later, you see Thomas come in and trying to be the hero, his gun out, like ready to protect. And I loved that. I loved seeing Thomas. I don't know how he got past the guards, but I love that he was there to protect Jacob and or who's Susanna, So it was kind of sweet when you saw Thomas kind of barge into the room thinking he was there to save them. So you kind of have this nice little conversation between Jacob, Thomas, and Susanna. She gets out the portrait of Catherine in the hidden door, the My Catherine, and she actually says, I quoted her here, Susanna says, she has been my light in the dark times. So that was a quote from Susanna. So that kind of puts to rest who did the painting, because I know, we did at one point see Thomas with paintbrushes and paint supplies. So we don't know if he was bringing them to Susanna or if Thomas paints himself. We really don't know. However, we do know it's confirmed that Susanna did the painting. And this time it was the painting. It wasn't the drawing or the sketch. This was the actual portrait that's hanging later, in the Goodwin mansion that we saw that, Kat purchased in 2024 or 2025. And so she really has this bond with Kat. Even when Jacob says something, Susanna kind of defends Kat. She has been my light in the dark times. And she basically drew this portrait, or the sketch we saw, and now an actual portrait of Catherine. So, the My Catherine, even though we hear Thomas say it, Susanna is the one who wrote My Catherine because she has a bond with her as well. So at least we kind of answer that question. And then Jacob says, I need you. And that's that. And that's when Cyrus rocks in. And he actually says, well, that's unfortunate. And I'm like, oh no. You see them in a room with Susanna and you happen to walk in right when another man that you hate says, I need your wife, right? So I'm like, oh, I cringed. Like, what is Cyrus gonna do? Because Cyrus just says that's unfortunate. However, he's not harming them. They were able to go out scot-free. They didn't get injured. But that was a nice moment with the three of them. We were able to see Thomas again, and Susanna kind of defended Kat, and I think Jacob needed to hear that. You also see there's another scene with Thomas and Jacob, and Thomas, like I said, is kind of like that friend, that father figure, that listening ear. Which I think in 2025 is kind of what Nick is to Elliot. Nick is kind of there to support Elliot. Like, hey, you've always supposed to be with, Kat, and she'll understand. And so I feel like Thomas is kind of doing that with Jacob. Jacob's talking about Kat. He's very upset about her lying and telling her about their father's death, right? Jacob and Kat's father, Colton. So, and then, Thomas is there to comfort him, and Jacob says, how can I love and hate her in this moment? Like, how in the same time can I love and hate my sister? And Thomas says, because she's family, and family is worth holding on to. So Thomas just seems to have those soothing words with the moment with Kat, at least more recently. Obviously, last season, he was kind of harsh with Kat, but now he seems to be real kind of nice and comforting and calm. And that's kind of what I saw with Jacob. Thomas was very calm. Jacob is upset, and he's telling his friend Thomas why he's upset with his sibling Kat. And Thomas is like, yep, that's family. You can love them and hate them. And I just thought that was a nice moment because Jacob needed that, especially from somebody he's familiar with, right? Because he's familiar with Thomas, he's familiar with Elijah. They're both telling him he needs to go back and, patch things up. So I really like that, he was that kind of that lending ear that Jacob needed. And then he kind of shakes his hand. They walk to the pond, he shakes his hand, and Jacob jumps in. And then you see Thomas take his jacket off, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's gonna jump. And he jumps in the pond. But then you see him come right back up and he doesn't go anywhere, right? And then he says enough. Now I actually rewound the recording because I taped the shows and wanted to make sure I heard what he said, and that's all I could make out was he just said enough. He seemed a little frustrated and he just said the word enough. So I think a lot of us are sad because, a lot of theories were that he could time travel to the future, or at least hoping he could, right? However, I do have my theories on that. Yes, he didn't go anywhere. They want us to believe that Thomas can't use the pond. And later, towards the end of the episode, Kat jumps in because I was telling you earlier, Susanna defended Kat that they have that relationship. And then when Elliot, finally tells Kat that he kissed Emma, she wants to talk to her friend. So she jumps in the pond looking for Susanna at the end of the episode and sees Thomas and says right away, like, Elliot kissed somebody else, Elliot kissed somebody else. And Thomas just takes her, holds her and says, now have you, now so as you, or should I say now so have you, I think is how I quoted it as him saying. So Kat's upset, wants to talk to Susanna. Elliot kissed somebody else, Elliot kissed somebody else, and then Thomas is like, so now you have to. And I thought it was a sweet moment. It was a real passionate kiss, and then it goes end of scene. But I think if we see the scene going forward, maybe next week we'll see it, because she doesn't jump back in the pond, so it just kind of cuts off the scene. So I'm assuming there's more to that. I think Kat kisses Thomas back, and I think Kat talks to Thomas because Thomas grabs her, kisses her, and then she seems a little shocked even though she embraces the kiss. So that's kind of what I think where that's going to go. I think next week we're going to see the second half of that scene. She's going to kiss him back and they're going to talk more. Maybe Thomas will tell Kat that he tried to jump and couldn't. We don't know. But I am going to talk at the end of my of this video about Thomas because I have my theory. Well, actually, I can tell you a little bit of it now. I think Thomas still might be able to time travel because remember, Elliot jumped and jumped in after Alice and he didn't go anywhere. Yet he was able to hold Alice's hand and go back and talk to Colton. So that tells me like, okay, sometimes you jump and you don't go anywhere. You'll find in 2025 too, at one point Kat tries to jump in to get Jacob back, and she doesn't go anywhere, and she goes back to Elliot and she's crying. She's like, I tried to go back and save Jacob again, and the pond told me no, like I couldn't go. So even people that can time travel like Kat and Alice sometimes are told no. They jump in the pond, brings them back up and says no. So just because Thomas jumped in by himself and he couldn't go, I think that means we know he's not a Landry. However, Elliot did go back with Alice. Elliot tried on his own and couldn't in the past season, and then he did. So I'm not saying that like Thomas can't time travel. Yes, I know Susanna jumped with Kat and couldn't, but you never know. You know what I mean? If it's only the Landrys that can time travel, does that mean Elliot has Landry in his blood somewhere, or you can travel with the Landry? If anybody can travel with the Landry, then why didn't Susanna? Right? So, I mean, I just have questions about it has to be a Landry, but if you're with a Landry, you can. That's not always correct. Susanna couldn't last season. And, maybe if Thomas jumps with Kat, he can go because Elliot tried on his own and couldn't, but went with Alice. And then even the Landrys jump and it's not their time to go, right? And you've heard Colton, supposedly he tried after Rick's funeral and he saw Alice and said, I tried and I couldn't. However, he did ask Alice how Colton said, how's my mom? How's the farm? So the fact that he asked her that makes me believe, and I know other people probably think this too, that he did jump and go back to the 1800s. Because if you just jumped in the pond and didn't go anywhere, you wouldn't have to ask and wonder, how is my mom? How is the farm? Unless you went somewhere else and you don't know what time period it is in the present after you jumped and got back, right? So I feel like that comment has brought on a lot of people with that theory. And I think that's an excellent theory because again, why would he ask Alice how my mom and the farm are? Oh, you just came from the farm. How's my mom? Everything okay? You know? If you're only gone 30 seconds, you don't need to ask. So we do find out in this episode that, that is indeed what happens. So that's exciting too. That we'll find out at the very end. There was a lot of great things in this episode. Going back to what I said at the beginning, the flashback was showing at the beginning that Dell and Kat would talk, right? Because we saw the flashback of her crying at the pond. So we do. Kat has that heart to heart with Dell. Dell's really shocked. And I think when Dell gets shocked, she wants to be alone. Right. So, your first instinct would be like, hug your daughter. She's just telling you something tragic. But Dell's character, and I feel like we've seen this before, with the notes she gets in the mail, she likes to kind of get shocked and go be alone. So she didn't hug Kat. She just got up and kind of walked upstairs. Alice comes in and kind of hugs Kat and comforts her. So I think everybody has a different personality. Me personally, I like to be comforted by a hug, right? Dell's not that person. If I see somebody suffering or hurting or crying, I want to go up there, give them a hug, put my arm around them, say, everything's going to be okay. But Dell is not really that person all the time. She's just kind of like, I need to process this. I need some time. And she kind of just gets up and walks out. So I was I didn't like that, Dell. I think you are a nice person on the show, and I feel like you should have hugged her. When Alice cries and confesses to Dell later on, Dell does hug Alice and say, oh, honey, Alice, because she said, please don't be mad at Kat. Please don't be mad at Mom. I was there too. She was pulling me out of the way. So Alice actually comes clean to Dell. Kat was protecting Alice, not telling Dell that Alice was there when Colton died. But Alice, breaks down to Dell and she does hug Alice in a comforting way. So, it's definitely, and Dell kind of took it not well. She went upstairs, but then Alice, Kat, and Elliot are talking, and they're like, she's taking long drives. She's not really talking to anybody. Kat wants to go back to the 1800s and talk to Jacob. And Alice actually tells Dell, like, can we all talk? Can we just hash everything out, And, I kind of said earlier, Kat wanted to go back and talk to Jacob. And then she comes back crying and Elliot comforts her. And, I wanted to see Jacob, but the pond won't take me. And then later on, she patches stuff up with Dell and goes back to Elliot and is like, that's why the pond didn't want to take me. I needed to patch things up with Dell. And that was the conversation that we heard from what was going to happen this week, that Dell was going to jump. I was super excited to see if Dell could jump because I know people have talked about, can only be Landry. She's Landry by marriage. Like what is, will she be able to do it? So I was excited to see her too. I was like, yes, go back to the 1800s, go back to the 70s, go back to any era. I'd love to see Dell time travel because I feel like they experience it. I kind of saw the demeanor in Elliot change. He was not understanding why Kat wanted to go back so much. And then he went back and he got his 5 minutes with Colton. And so I feel like Elliot understands now that he was able to do it. So I kind of was hoping that would be with Dell. Like, you're going to jump and you're going to see it. You're going to see it and understand it more. So I was kind of bummed that she didn't jump because right when they were going to, or agreed they were going to, in comes Jacob. but I'm still not disappointed. I mean, I knew Jacob was going to come back, right? I'm glad we had the scenes, the couple scenes we had in the 1800s. I love seeing Susanna. That actress plays an amazing job. Susanna is an awesome character, and she plays her so well. And you see Nick a couple times throughout. I feel like, Nick is living with Elliot temporarily, and in essence, he's living with Kat as well, since Kat's living with Elliot. So Nick is kind of seeing Kat's been down with everything going on with Jacob and Dell. So he wants to, Nick's such a happy character. He wants to make things right and have fun. So he plans his karaoke night, kind of ropes Alice into it, and they do this karaoke night. And, you know, they have this song. They get up there and they sing this song, kind of a sad song, but the vocals were great. I don't know if that's really Kat and Elliot's character singing or if somebody else was singing, but again, kudos to the vocalist on the track. It was beautiful. I loved Kat's voice. I loved Elliot singing with her. And then I loved the flashbacks. So they're singing, and the flashbacks is their relationship, up until season 3. And I like that because they have that past, they have that connection. From childhood, right? So I thought that was a sweet moment. And again, I always point out the vocals because even when Alice sings, like all the vocals have been really great for these characters. So that was sweet. That's kind of where you saw Nick. And then you have, and then at the end, Dell comes and Kat, stops singing the song and hugs Dell. So I feel like they reunited. So it was a really sweet moment. Like I said, I love the singing. I love seeing the flashbacks of the Elliot and Kat relationship because it kind of shows you in a nutshell and catches you up with all their drama back and forth. And then you do see Sam with Dell, and I kind of liked that because we want answers from Sam, right? So Dell basically Sam, what's up? Why were you walking with Casey? Basically, so glad Dell said something. And he basically says, yeah, I was. She's a client. She needed legal advice last year. Can't say anything more, attorney-client privilege. So, I mean, he answered the question. I'm glad Dell asked it. But to me, I just, I was like, yeah, attorney-client privilege, you're not going to say anything. And we know that he is a lawyer, so I'm like, it's not really a stretch. Like, give me information that I don't kind of already know, because that can be assumed that they were helping each other. But what I didn't see, what I didn't like, or what I noticed, I should say, not just that Dell asked about him walk with Casey, but then Dell tells Sam that Jacob left, not sure when he's going to be back. And then Sam is like, well, where is he? And I thought, like, why are you probing? You can tell, Dell's telling you, I haven't really been right. I'm sorry, I've been pushing you away a little bit. Jacob left and I'm not sure when he'll be back. So I just feel like that wasn't the right time for Sam to probe. So that made me a little like suspicious. I know I've said it before. I'm a little suspicious of Sam. I hope he's a good guy. You've seen my past videos. I talk very highly of Sam. I love Sam for Dell. I feel like Dell needs a good man relationship, somebody to talk to, a love interest. So I love that Sam is a great love interest for Dell. However, that being said, I've seen a side of Sam in the last couple episodes where I feel like he's more aggressive. He's more the comforting boyfriend, and now he's like, well, where is Jacob? You don't know when he'll be back? Like, and of course, Dell doesn't want to say anything, but I don't know. I don't like that Sam was asking those questions, and then he completely kind of blows off the Casey thing. Well, attorney-client privilege, right? So I didn't really like that. I like that, later on, you see more about that, with Sam and Dell. So Dell actually tells Alice, like, hey, I talked to Sam, and tells them basically what they said. And I don't know if Alice really buys it, right? I think Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just looking at my notes. I'm glad she said that. Like, I feel like sometimes you want character to say things and they never do. That's one of the reasons why I really like Alice, because I feel like Alice kind of speaks her mind to everybody. Kat's yelled at her, Dell's yelled at her, Colton's yelled at her. I feel like people have gotten upset with Alice, but she has really grown to be my favorite character. I love her demeanor. I love the actress who plays her. She does such an amazing job. And Alice is just a really sweet person, and she's there for everybody, right? Like even that scene in the 70s. I don't know why I'm here. Oh, I'm here for you, Evie. So she's there to be a friend to her mom when she was a teenager, Kat. She was there to be a friend to Elliot after Kat went off with Brady. She's there to be a friend and comforting to Evelyn while she sees, her grandparents, Colton and Dell, get together. So Alice has always kind of been that friend. She's seeing her family history, right, by going back in time, but she's been that loving friend, comfort to everybody. So, and she's just so tenderhearted. I really, really enjoy all of Alice's scenes. So, I'm glad, like I said, I'm glad Dell confronted Sam, and you'll see another scene with Sam. But speaking of Alice, you see Alice go to Max. So, Max sends her a text earlier, like talking about, their lab partners and talking about work. So Alice goes to see Max, and he's like, "What, you want a tour?" And Alice is like, "Yeah, I've been here many times, but let's go to the attic." So they go to the attic, and of course, they see the hidden door. In the hidden door, you find a flip phone and a chess piece. The chess piece, which, if you don't know a lot about chess, which I don't, but I did look it up, and it is the bishop. So if you, kind of screenshot the picture of the piece, it is a bishop. So Sam Bishop, is there a connection there? Who was using the flip phone? And then Max says, "Well, there was a squatter here last summer," and immediately Alice goes to Casey or even Colton. But Casey, I think, we all think maybe Colton too, because we know he time travels. But then they get into a little bit of an argument. Max says, and I quote, "Getting involved doesn't make things better. It just makes things worse." So Alice kind of, gets hurt. She starts crying. She's kind of sad and hurt by that, and she leaves. So my impression was she actually like leaves the house. So I don't think they ever get their lab work done. So you don't really see Max go up and apologize to Alice or anything like that. You can kind of see after he says it, he's kind of like, like I probably shouldn't have said that, but he didn't feel bad enough to stop her because she still left. So that was interesting. Like, what does Max know, right? And we kind of know a little bit more at the end, which I'll talk about because Elliot has a conversation with Alice about Max as well. And, like I said earlier, Dell does hug Alice when Alice tells her, "Hey, I was there too. It wasn't just mom. I was there with Colton's death." You see a scene with Alice and Kat. I was talking about the chess piece. So Alice actually tells Kat about that chess piece and the burner phone and the hidden door in the attic. And Alice basically says to Kat, "It was Casey." Like as soon as Matt said they had a squatter last summer, I feel like Alice immediately went to, "I know it was Casey," right? I mean, she didn't say anything in front of Max, but she definitely does say it right to her mom. And then Kat, like, totally, "No, I don't think so. Like, nobody's from the future. Like, it's still far fetched." And then Casey just shows up, like, right as they're saying that, which is like, okay, yes, that was me. So she lied. She says she wasn't Lewis's kid, but she is still a Goodwin. Lewis is a second cousin. And then she explains everything about Sam. He helped with the legal matter. And then Casey even says, it felt like family when she was with Kat and she wanted to do something nice. So she called her parents and told her parents to call Lewis. And their family friend Sam helped out with the legal work. So, And then she also talks a little bit about how she was having a bad summer. So something happened to her personally last summer. This is what I don't get. If you were having the worst summer, something happened, you must have been on somewhat good terms with your parents, because if you're pissed at your parents and she said she ran away, so she runs away, she calls her parents, not to say, come get me, but she calls her parents to tell them to call Lewis to save the Landry farm. So even that doesn't make sense to me. Like, you're saying, your parents called Lewis, but wouldn't your parents say, come home? Who cares about the Landry farm? Like, I'm more worried that you ran away from home. I mean, being a parent, if my child ran away at any age, right? And they call me. I mean, if she ran away, she's probably not in calling her parents every day or every week like you would on a summer vacation. And so she calls her parents, and all of a sudden her parents are just like, sure, we'll do you this favor, right? You ran away from home. I haven't seen you in 3 months, but sure, I'll do this favor for you. I'll call my brother or my relative Lewis and help you out, right? Like, I understand Casey had an answer for everything. But again, you probably saw this in other videos. The reason why I was so, talking or so theorying, having a theory about Casey time traveling to the future was because why did she have the legal documents, right? What teenager has legal documents, goes up to Dell and says, hey, they decided not to buy your farm. Like, here's the paperwork. Yes, she was an intern at the paper, but that always stuck with me, and it sticks with me here too. Like, she admitted that she lied, but I think she's just saying another lie again. Like, I don't buy it. I called my parents, and I talked to them, and I convinced them, and I told them to call Lewis, and they convinced Lewis to not buy it. Like, I don't know. I don't buy it. I'm not saying everything that Casey says is a lie, but I don't buy that she's now cousins with Lewis, right? And she ran away from home because it was so bad, yet it wasn't so bad that she could call him up and ask for a favor, right? And that her parents actually did it. What was it like? You have to do this or I won't come home. Like, wouldn't your parents be, what's this, what's all of a sudden you're really into my distant cousin Lewis not buying this property? Like, I don't know. It just seems so far-fetched. If I went to intern in a completely different state, and ran away from my parents for 3 months, and now all of a sudden I'm calling them because somebody I just met, I want them to stop buying property from the Landrys, who she's not related to. Like, I'm sorry, it just does not add up for me. It's just loopholes. And the Sam being in legal, obviously that fits. If he's legal attorney-client privilege, I get it. I still think he was kind of smug about it. Dell asks about Casey to Sam, and then Sam asks, well, where's Jacob? Like, I don't know. So I'm still suspicious of Casey. I'm still suspicious of Sam. I thought earlier when you would see Dell and Sam, like in other episodes, he was always comforting and loving. And now I just feel like he's more concerned and more wanting to know. Like, I'm just going to say this one thing. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole because this wasn't in this episode. But remember when Jacob comes back and, Elliot comes over the next morning, and of course he wants to see Jacob, and he's kind of like family, and Dell's like, go on in, and Sam shows up at the house. Well, why? So I just thought it was odd that Sam came the morning after Jacob got back. You know what I mean? Like, the significance of him coming on that day at that time. Oh, I have a family thing. Why? Is everything okay? So I feel like somehow Sam knew Jacob was back, right? So I just feel like Sam knows more. Is he a time traveler? I don't know. Is he, Elliot to Alice when Alice time traveled and Elliot couldn't, but he helped her? Maybe Sam's helping Casey. I don't know. Maybe he's just the legal guy for Casey, but I feel like there's more to that story. I want Sam to be a good guy. I want him to get with Dell. People are talking maybe Colton's alive and he comes back. If Colton's alive and he comes back, I want him with Dell, right? Colton, I want with Dell. But if Colton isn't alive, then yes, I want Dell to be with Sam. I want to believe he's a good guy. There's just so many red flags for me. And then, Dell gets another unsigned note. Again, talking about timing, right time at the right place. She gets another unsigned letter, and then Rita drives up. Now, again, on this show, we question everything, right? There's got to be red herrings. There's got to be things that don't matter. There's got to be things called fluff or, filler, right? Even every series that they're like, this is the end game, so we're going to throw this relationship in here, we're going to throw this conversation and this character, this side character, and their stories don't matter in the end plot of the series. So we really don't know which characters are important and which characters are just in there to fluff up the episode or the season, so to speak. So I don't know if that's Rita's character, because we don't know much about Rita, but of course she shows up the day she gets another unsigned note. In this episode, we don't see what the unsigned note says. Like, I've written down on my notepad like what the other two notes say, but she does get another one. And she opens up to Rita. They sit on the bed and Rita's seeing all the different notes. What I thought was interesting was Rita was like, I've seen all the seasons of Murder, She Wrote. It's always the least person you expect. So as Rita's saying that, I'm like, Rita, you're the least person that Del would suspect. So you're saying it's always the least person you expect, so it has to be Sam. But I was reading it as the least person to suspect is you. I'm not saying Rita's the one sending the notes to Del. I just think that was really ironic for Rita to say that when really Rita or some other side character is probably the least likely. I don't necessarily think Sam's sending the notes. He could. I'm still leaning towards, Max or Lewis or even Casey. But I have my suspicions about Sam, but I'm not quite sure he's the one leaving her the notes. I do think he knows more than he's saying. But and if you ask like, well, who do you think sending the notes? I don't know. I still have theories about that. I just don't think at the moment right now it's Sam. I'm open to it. I told you this is judge-free zone. All theories are welcome. I'm open to it being Sam. I'm just not getting that gut feeling that it's Sam. But that doesn't mean that I'm wrong. Or that I'm right, because I can be wrong all the time. We come up with theories and then we watch the next episode and we're like, nope, that one wasn't right. Oh, that one was right. This happened. And so definitely interesting. I think that was just a filler to show Rita, but I thought it was interesting. She's like, it's the least likely person. And then she talks about some past case with Sam and thinks maybe it's the Sam put away this character and testified twice to keep him in jail, and he got released anyways, so maybe he's coming back and trying to get revenge on Sam because Sam is trying to keep him in jail, as goes to the parole hearings and wants to keep him in jail, and he got out. So that's always the possibility. I mean, that is a very common theme in shows, especially crime dramas. I love them. You always see people getting out of jail getting revenge on the witness or the lawyer or whoever put them in there. So I mean, that is definitely a theory that, like I said, is very common in shows. So what Rita was saying could be, but I think it's really far-fetched, and honestly, I don't buy it. We don't even know if that's that Sam Bishop. Yes, the article is about a Sam Bishop. We don't know if that's really him or if he made up the name. Also, the chess piece, Bishop, his last name is Bishop. Was that a sign of somebody trying to tell us something? So I don't really think that was much. Like I say, I think that was just a scene for Rita. But definitely, definitely interesting to see that. I wanted to just make sure I don't forget anything. There is a scene when Elliot does tell Kat about kissing Emma. Before he tells her that, Kat kind of eavesdrops, comes into the house, Elliot's house, and kind of hears part of Elliot and Jacob's conversation. So Alice goes to jump, to 74 to see young Colton, and Jacob is there, and Alice and Jacob have a conversation like, look, when there's somebody I need to talk to, I talk to Elliot. So he's always there to comfort me and talk to me. So Jacob does go to Elliot, takes Alice's advice, and they start talking. You hear a little bit about Elliot's mom, not a lot. Just that, shortly after she left Vic and Elliot, she passed away, according to what Elliot was saying. So it kind of answers one of the questions, where's Elliot's mom? Well, apparently she passed away. But they talk about the clock. Everybody talks about the clock. So Jacob actually sees the clock, and Elliot, for the first time that we're aware of, tells somebody where they found it, right? Because Kat, Alice, Dell, nobody knows where the clock came from. We know it came from the wall, but what I'm saying is Elliot hasn't told anybody. So this is the first time I believe Elliot actually talks about the clock with somebody, and tells Jacob. And Jacob's like, yeah, me and my dad used to do these. So then you're like, okay, does it have to do with anything? And Elliot even says it's broken, it doesn't work, but I can't throw it out. It's just like, I feel like I need to keep it around. And I just thought that was interesting. We finally hear about the clock. Somebody besides Elliot notices the clock, right? Because it's been sitting there all episodes and nobody's even mentioned it. So I'm glad somebody finally talks about the clock. Still leaves me with a lot of questions, but at least somebody said something, right? So we really don't know much about the clock, other than Jacob was admiring it and saying he used to work on it with Colton. So that was kind of the conversation Kat overheard. So when Elliot tells Kat, I kissed Emma, that's when she's like, I'm going to move back in. Maybe Jacob can move in here. He needs a friend. So I feel like that was part of that conversation. And then Dell gets a text, about the article that I was talking about. But the question is that the same person? You didn't see a picture. You just heard the name Sam Bishop. And like I say, if it is, who left the chess piece? We want to know about that. And then when Dell talks to Sam again, so there is another scene with Dell and Sam. And Sam, same thing where I mentioned earlier when he was like, well, where is Jacob? Like, he wasn't really comforting to Dell, but kind of like asking questions and probing, which he's done in other conversations with Dell. He kind of does that here. He kind of nonchalant, like, he can't really talk about it. It's a case, client privilege, attorney-client privilege. And he asks about Casey, and he's like, well, that's attorney-client privilege. And then he asks about Jacob. And I loved this. Adele was like, well, that's mother-son privilege. And I loved it. I was like, yes, go sassy Dell. Like, I love that, because Sam was so nonchalant about it. Dell wants some answers and he's like, I can't really tell you, well, that's, how's Jacob? Like, let me go back to my probing questions. You tell me more about, your family secrets. And that's when Dell was like, mother-son privilege. So I actually really liked that she said that. I was like, okay, yes, I love that. So the couple scenes that we saw Sam in, I don't think he looked good. You know what I mean? Like, not physically, but just like in the scenes, I feel like he was probing Dell, asked where Jacob was, and then nonchalant about the whole article and somebody in jail, asked about Casey. Oh, well, whatever, just helping her with the legal thing. I can't talk about it. How's Jacob? Jacob's home? I just love that she said that. So that's really all we see of Sam. And I feel like he was a little suspicious the few scenes we saw with him and Dell. So again, jury's still out on who Sam is, why he's there. Is he helping Casey? Is he a time traveler? Is he a good one? What does he want? I hope he has, good intentions. I like him with Dell. But I am still very suspicious of him and skeptical of him. So we're getting down to the end of the episode, which to me is always the best part because I know they're going to leave me with some cliffhangers. So this is the part that I really just kind of wanted to talk about because this was a theory that a lot of people were talking about, the potatoes and rye. So we know it came from Fern. We know in the scene where they were gonna, hang Kat, Jacob, and Thomas. You see a picture and it might not be Fern. I know people are saying, well, that's not Fern. Well, why have a close up of a bystander if it's not significant? Is they doing that on purpose to kind of throw us off? Because I didn't see the point. You saw town people in the background, but you kind of saw a close up of one specific town person that looked like Fern. So I'm going on that it was Fern. It might not be. Maybe it was somebody in the Landry family, but I just find it odd that they did kind of a close up of her. Did Fern go back and tell him about potato and rye, or was it Colton, right? Because remember, we see the sketch that Susanna made, and it looks like a young Jacob and a young Colton. So now Jacob wouldn't know, because Jacob obviously didn't know who Colton was at that time, but it does answer a lot of questions. So when Jacob sees the picture of a young Dell and Colton, he like recognizes him right away. He says, that was the boy at the farm in 1814. I stopped and made sure I heard him say the year, because remember, current time is 1816, the year of no summer. So we're past 1814. So 1816 was the year of no summer, where they had the potatoes and rye, but they heard about it in 1814. So he says that's the boy at the farm in 1814 that tells us to plant the potatoes and rye. So we do know a young teen Colton travels back to the 1800s and sees Jacob and Elijah. So, I mean, we knew all along that Colton could time travel. We don't know how or when or what age he was, but we've seen flashbacks of an adult Colton looking at an adult Colton outside with his family, with Kat and Jacob, so at a young age. So, I mean, we know he time travels. Now, this has been a theory going on too, which I kind of talked a little bit about earlier, when Colton tries to jump in the pond to save Rick, right after Rick's funeral. And we know he jumped right after Rick's funeral because he tells Alice and kind of Evie a little bit. Well, I guess he doesn't really tell Evie he jumped, but he tells Alice, look, I jumped after Rick's funeral. I tried to go back. My grandmother said the pond is magical. I tried to prevent his death and I didn't. I couldn't. But he did go back to the 1800s. We don't know how long he stayed, but he was the one who told Jacob they needed to plant potatoes and rye, or how important it was that when it gets cold, make sure you plant this. So my question is, how does a teen Colton know to plant potatoes and rye unless he's hearing his grandma Fern sing potatoes and rye, right? So, I mean, we definitely find out who, because you probably saw my last video, who told him about the potatoes and rye, right? Kat had to have heard that when she went back for Susanna and Cyrus's wedding last episode, but she was so focused on Susanna and Cyrus and basically being safe, because they're all gonna die being, the White Witch. So I'm sure she didn't think of it, but I feel like when Elijah said that at the table, that should have, Kat should have been like, what? So I wanted to know. I was like, Kat, why didn't you ask Elijah? But like I said, I guess she was focused on other stuff. So now we know teenage Colton travels back to 1814, spends time with Elijah, spends time with Jacob, and tells them about planting the potatoes and rye. So I'm definitely glad you answered that question. However, my other question is, how did he know? Has Fern told him? Because obviously he wasn't planning on going back to the 1800s. The pond takes you where it needs to go. He wanted to prevent Rick's death. He went way far back. But somehow he knew to potatoes and rye. So, I mean, I guess that's my question. I know Colton grew up on the farm. I know Colton's a Landry, but I hope they explain, like, how did Colton know to tell them to plant potatoes and rye? And how does a teen Colton know, there's going to be a summer of 1816 with no summer? Like, are we going to find out he researched it? Because we really don't know much about a young teen Colton, except that, he was best friends with Evie, and they know about the pond from from Fern, Colton's grandmother. But I guess that's my question. I guess Fern sang a song How did a teenage Colton know to tell them? We know he went back there, but how do we know he knows about potatoes and rye, if that makes sense? And I'm sure that's probably, one of those questions that doesn't need to be answered because there's so many other exciting and juicy answers we want. But I'm glad we find out it's Colton, but we really don't find out how does he know. So basically, Jacob is coming to the realization, like, I knew my dad when he was a teenager. He helped out on the farm. I didn't know that's who he was. But that does kind of go together with the scene in previous episodes where a young Jacob and an adult Colton, goes to the gravesite and talks about how Elijah and Rebecca, worked hard on the farm and that they were good people because he knew firsthand. He knew because he time traveled to 1814 and saw Elijah. So we all kind of thought that. If you look at my theories video I made a couple weeks ago, when I just focused on all of the scenes with Jacob and Colton and all of the quotes, you can kind of tell he knew, right? And so this confirms that he knew firsthand what he was saying about Elijah and Rebecca because he was there. So I'm glad we see that. So we definitely know a teenage Colton time travels. Why he hasn't told anybody, we don't know. We don't know what happened in 1814 while he was there. Maybe it was really traumatic. Maybe he goes back and tells Fern, and Fern tells him, you can't tell anybody. Like, we really don't know who he tells or like what makes him a rule breaker. So I really would like to see in the next episode a teen Colton talking to Grandma Fern. I've told you before, if you've seen my videos, I love Fern. Everything she says is liquid gold. Everything she says I want to write down because it means something. You'll see a couple episodes ago, I wrote down potatoes and rye, and everybody's like, oh, well, she's probably just senile. Why is she singing about potatoes and rye? It means nothing. I knew it meant something. I didn't know what it meant at the time, but I knew it meant something. And then we find out last episode it did. That's how the Landry farm survived during, the year of no summer because of that. So just take that to heart. Every time you see Fern, I take everything that she says and I know I'm going to learn about it later. So what I'm hoping for is a conversation with Fern and teenage Colton after he time travels so Fern can tell him, like, okay, these are the rules of the pond. Don't tell anybody, or something. Because I feel like Colton was close with Fern. That's the only reason he would really know about potatoes and rye, unless, he just worked on the farm all his life and knew that, kind of like a young Jacob in the 1800s. Because I feel like a teenage Jacob would know that because he worked on the farm. But we don't know. So I really loved that we found that out. And I thought it was interesting too, like Kat jumps in the pond again. Just have that end scene with Thomas Kistner. But as soon as Kat jumps into the pond, Alice comes out of the pond. And I was like, whoa, there's like seconds in between that. So that was interesting to me because they don't see each other, right? So Kat jumps in, Alice comes right out. And when she's coming out of the pond, you can see she's still wet. She's coming up to the house and Casey's on the property. So, I mean, right then, when they ran into her before Alice jumped, I was telling you they had that conversation about, oh, Lewis is my second cousin. She said that her parents are waiting for her and that she had to leave, right? That's how she kind of got out of that conversation at the point where they were all talking at the cafe. And then Alice sees her on her property, Landry property. So I would have thought, my first thought for Alice to Casey is like, why are you on the Landry property? Like, you just told us at the cafe your parents are waiting for you. Now all of a sudden you're on our property alone. Like, that would have been my first question. But I'm not upset at Alice. I love Alice. She actually confronts her about the ring, and I loved that. Like, hey, is that a family ring? Like, how do you have that ring? And Casey says it's a family heirloom, and she says, oh, a good one. Goodwin family, and Casey says no. Remember, watch that back. She does actually say no. I know a lot of people are like, oh, she says, it's a Goodwin, and then she runs. No, she looks at Alice and says no, and then turns around and runs. So she does admit to Alice, like it's a family heirloom. Oh, a Goodwin family heirloom? No. And then she runs. So one thing I noticed when she's running and Alice is chasing her, she runs on the rock and jumps in the pond. However, she doesn't hesitate or stop or look, like she knew where she was going. Remember when Kat was running away, she was a white witch episode seasons ago. She was running in the pond. They don't stop. Like, they're time travelers. They know they're being hunted. They gotta go, right? I mean, Kat is running for her life. Cyrus's men are after her. She doesn't stop and look and like step on the rock. She just jumps right in. And I feel like that's exactly what Casey did. She's a time traveler. She didn't think about it. She wasn't like, oh, where she ran, and she didn't even stop. One swift motion. She kept on running and jumped. So, I mean, that confirms it for me. She's definitely a time traveler because she didn't hesitate. She knew she had to get into that pond, and she just, in one swift motion, kept running and went right on in. And end of scene. So she doesn't come back up. I mean, we're assuming she's a time traveler, and that's the end. So, I mean, definitely a wonderful episode. I loved that we got confirmation that Casey's a time traveler. And then I'm also sad that we found out that Thomas couldn't time travel. However, like I said, the pond can be fickle, right? Even people that can time travel don't always. We saw in this episode, Kat tried to jump and it took her back to the present. She couldn't. Like, the pond didn't want to take her. And then she told Elliot, the pond didn't take me because I had to patch stuff up with Dell. And then Jacob comes back on his own. And then Elliot tried to jump after Alice in season 1, didn't go anywhere. Yet with Alice, he did. So I know Kat is a Landry and she time travels and she couldn't bring Susanna with her, but maybe she should try to bring Thomas with her and maybe Thomas will go. Maybe it wasn't his time. Remember Colton, we know for a fact time traveled. We just saw it today. We just saw it in this episode. But he also is saying he tried to jump before and couldn't. So was he lying, or is he tried to jump and just like Kat in this episode, basically the pond said no and she came right back up in the same time period? Maybe Colton's jumped and it hasn't taken him anywhere. And then when he did try to go back to save Rick, that's when he went to the 1800s and told him about the potatoes and rye. So a lot to take in. I'm still not sad about Thomas because I feel like there's more to that story. Maybe he will jump with Kat. What I'm curious of is enough. What does enough mean? Does enough mean Thomas has tried to jump before? It was just an odd word to say. He's like, enough. Maybe this is his third or fourth try and he keeps thinking every time that he'll be able to. I definitely want to see Thomas try to jump with Jacob or Kat. We saw Susanna try to jump with Kat and couldn't, but maybe Thomas can. Maybe he can't, but I'm just saying, like, that's going to be one of my questions, because even the time travelers, sometimes the pond says no, like we saw in this episode. Kat tried to jump and it didn't take her anywhere. And I feel like that's happened to Alice too. I'm a little disappointed Dell didn't jump because I was so looking forward to that. I think that was one of the biggest things I was looking forward to in this episode, was seeing Dell jump and having Dell experience it. Like I said earlier, it was nice to Elliot, I feel like, understood a little bit more once he was able to jump. Because Elliot would say, well, why don't you just tell Colton? Why don't you... And Kat and Alice were like, well, once you get back there, you don't. You just want your time. And then Elliot went back and he could have done the same thing. He could have told Colton about time travel, but he just wanted to enjoy 5 more minutes with Colton. So I really feel like that helped Elliot a lot understand. And I think that's why Alice said, come with me, Elliot. I want you to understand. So that's why I'm a little disappointed, because I think it would really help Dell understand if Dell could jump. I'm hoping it would be the same thing that Elliot felt when he jumped. So, there was definitely a lot going on this episode. I liked seeing Nick. I think Nick is a very handsome, handsome man. I love every scene I could see Nick in because I think he's just so full of life, and I think it's good for Elliot to have a friend. I do hope that Jacob moves in with Elliot because I think Jacob needs a friend. And you probably seen in one of my comments in my other videos, I was hoping Kat and Del would patch things up because Kat doesn't have anybody to confide in. Kat doesn't have a Nick, right? Like Nick is able to help Elliot, long lost friend who knows about time travel, so he can really talk to Nick about anything. And he does. He tells, Nick, he kissed Emma. He tells Nick about his relationship with Kat. Kat doesn't have anybody to confide in. That's one of the reasons why at the end of the episode you see her kiss Thomas kiss her. She jumped. She needed a friend. Suzanne is the friend she can talk to. She found Thomas instead. You never see the end of that scene, so maybe she does go up to the house and talk to Susanna. Who knows? But that's what you kind of, and I'm glad they patched it up. I'm glad Del and Kat talked. I'm glad Alice came clean with Del and Del hugged her. So there definitely is a lot that happened in this episode that I'm happy about. Potatoes and why we found out. We actually saw Colton time travel. The theory about him, the Rick after the funeral, Colton did time travel to 1814 and tell them about it ahead of time. So we do know that was confirmed. A lot of questions. I still have questions with Casey. Another thing that we found out, which I thought was interesting, was there was a scene with Elliot and Alice and Kat. But Elliot, Alice said to Elliot, give me another lab partner. Like, this isn't working. And then Elliot was like, well, really? Max just turned in your paperwork and said that you did most of it. Like you held your own weight. And so I think Alice was taken back by that because Alice didn't do any of the work. Remember, she ran out of the attic crying and hurt. So Max did all of the work for the lab and then turned it in and then lied and told Elliot that she pulled her weight and she did her own part. So, and then says, Max is having a hard time with Evelyn's death. She was very close, Max was very close with Evelyn. So he's, having a hard time grieving. And that took Alice back. So I think Alice was like, wait, okay. So I was talking about Evelyn and it struck a chord with Max because Max is having a hard time grieving his grandmother because he was close with her. So what did, Evelyn tell Max? What does Max already know? So that's what I want to know. Now that we know that Max was close with Evelyn, what did Evelyn tell him? And is he going to get that, is Alice going to get that out of him? Because he must have felt bad for making Alice cry and kind of being rude to her because he did all of the work and then didn't even take credit for it, which he seems like a cocky teenager. So I'm like, how come you didn't take credit for it? That doesn't sound like you, Max. And, he told Elliot that she did her part. So definitely interesting. There's going to be a lot more that I want to see with Max because, Max, I hope, apologizes to Alice. I think that was kind of his way of apologizing, was telling Elliot she did work when she didn't. But we want to hear more about what Evelyn possibly could have told Max since they were really close and he's having a hard time with their death. And then, of course, what the phone was, the flip phone and the chess piece. Was the Bishop chess piece supposed to be about Sam? Did Casey leave the phone and the chess piece? Did Sam leave the chess piece and the phone? I don't think so because I think he's implying there's something going on with Sam because Sam Bishop, or if Colton was time traveling and left the pieces, or if Evelyn left the pieces of the chess piece. Like, we don't know who left that information in the attic. And flip phones. 2005 flip phone started to come out. So I mean, you kind of got to think, like, how long has it been in there and why is Casey lying? Because I think she's lying again. I have a hard time believing anything that comes out of Casey's mouth. Who's she related to? I don't know. I've gone back and forth on that. I don't really have a theory. I said earlier, I think her being Alice's child is too obvious. Just like I think it's too obvious that the baby in the basket and the couple jumping with the baby in the basket is Dell and Colton. I think it's too obvious that Dell was pregnant. I don't think she was. Or if she was pregnant, maybe she got an abortion or something, because she did not look pregnant. A summer's 3 months. There's no way she was that flat and in 3 months got to 9 months and had a baby before she left for the summer. Like, obviously she wasn't pregnant. But I always thought that maybe Casey was Jacob's child, because he wants to settle down and have a family. I don't know. I really don't have any theories, solid theories on who Casey could be related to. But I will say, when she first interned for Kat, yes, she was happy to see Kat. Also, remember, Kat welcomed her with open arms. When she first got there to intern for Kat last season, she tried to connect with Alice. She lit up when she saw Kat. She lit up when she saw Alice. And she lit up when she heard Kat talk about Jacob. So in my opinion, she was wanting to spend time with Alice. She even said, "Oh, you play? Maybe I could listen to you play." And Alice kind of blew her off. I still love Alice. But when I hear people say, well, Casey was only interested in Kat. No, Casey was interested in Kat and Alice. Go rewatch the episodes. Alice shot her down, and Kat was more open. So since Kat was more open and nice to Casey, Casey latched onto Kat to try to find out more information. She tried to be nice to Alice, and Alice didn't really have time for her. Like, "Oh, you internship there?" Like, it's okay. And Alice just didn't, I don't think Alice was rude to Casey, but I think Casey was trying to form a friendship with Alice as well as Kat. But Kat was really the only one that was more, openly accepting of her help and of her presence there. So I don't think that means, she's not Alice's child because she didn't want to befriend Alice. She did, I think. And she did light up when she heard Jacob's name. So I think Casey could be related to any of them. There's so many wonderful, great theories. And like I say, judgment free. I don't judge anybody. I welcome all the theories because I think anything is possible. And then the previews show, Colton saying to Alice in 1974, I know you are like me. And I think that could be cryptic and misleading. Maybe he says, "I know you're like me because you like to sing and you're musical." Maybe it has nothing to do with time travel. Hallmark just wants you to think that. That's why they throw it in the preview. So we'll have to wait and see. And then we know Colton time travels and he says, "Where am I?" And I think that's him in the 1800s. So I'm hoping we're going to see that too. We're going to see how he knows about potatoes and rye, his interaction with Jacob and Elijah in the 1800s, 1814, which I'm excited to see. And then secrets. Dell says, you can't keep secrets from the ones you love. And then Kat says to Elliot, "No more secrets." So a lot of the preview was about people, talking about secrets. It was a great episode. Every episode of the show was great. I never have anything really bad to say. As always, I'm always left with more questions. So we all thought Casey was time traveling. She was. However, I will say this about the time traveling. I know everybody is going back and forth on whether people can travel to the future, right? Elliot's rules or whatever of the pond. We don't really know if Elliot's rules are the main rules. I know people have said that's what the writers say, but I feel like it could just be a twist and a turn. So maybe there's rules about the pond we don't know about first. But what I will say is this. Casey might be from the future, but the pond still goes backwards. Okay, let's keep that in mind. Alice, Kat, they're in 2025. Last season's that you were in 2024. They traveled back to 1974 to 1999 to the 1800s. Casey's not traveling to the future. She's from the future. So she is still traveling back. So if she's from 2040 or whatever, 2025 is going backwards. So I don't think we've seen anybody travel to the future just yet, right? So like, oh, you must travel to the future because Casey's from the future, but she's not traveling ahead of her life. She's traveling behind. So kind of like how Alice traveled to 1999 and she wasn't born yet, but she was seeing her parents. I think Casey's doing the same thing. Casey's from the future. She's traveling back to 2025, seeing her family, her parents, maybe her grandparents at a young age. So I think in 2025, Casey isn't born yet. right? So she's not traveling to the future, she's traveling backwards. So when Thomas tried to jump in the pond to jump forward to see Kat in 2025, the pond didn't take him, right? So I think that rule is still in place. You can only travel backwards. Even Colton, he wanted to travel and save Rick, but he traveled like way back because they took him to the 1814. So I just think, can people time travel to the future? We technically have not seen that yet. Thomas tried, he couldn't. Not that he couldn't travel to the future, but maybe he just can't time travel through the pond because we know he's a coil. So to say the least, I kind of am not 100% sure you can travel to the future, but I'm not taking it out because Casey didn't travel to the future. She traveled to her current time. Just like when Kat and Alice travel, they come back to their current time, which is 2025. So Casey was time traveling to 2025 and she was going back to her current present day, which could be 2040 or whatever. So I still don't think we've seen anybody travel to the future. Everybody is traveling backwards. And like I said, Casey is traveling backwards to before she was born, like Alice before she was born, like, Jacob and Colton, in the 1800s, they were traveling before, well, not Jacob, but Kat traveling to the 1800s before she was born. So that being said, it's still possible somebody could travel to the future, but remember, Casey wasn't traveling to the future. She was from the future. So I like Thomas, but I think I want to see him try to travel with the Landry just to knock that out completely. Because to me, you haven't closed the book. Thomas cannot travel by himself. Okay, we established that. We haven't established if he can travel with the Landry. So we'll find out. I still have a glimmer of hope, right? But definitely exciting episode. I am very much excited to get to the next episode. As always, I'm glad they talked about the clock. I'm glad we saw more information with Casey. However, I don't believe it necessarily because you're still saying you're a Goodwin. The ring, is it a Goodwin family heirloom? No. And then she runs and she knows she can go back to her time, runs right into the pond. So definitely I hope they gave us some more answers. I hope you enjoyed my review. I know it was long, but we had so much to talk about. And again, judgment-free zone. If you want to spin theories, leave me comments. My comments and my feelings go back and forth. I like Kat and Elliot together. I like Kat and Thomas together. This was a very rocky season for Kat and Elliot fans. So I know people have strong views on Elliot. Like I said, no judgment, I like her with both. However, I have heard people say that Kat and Elliot are the end game, that it's kind of like Ross and Rachel on Friends. And as you can see behind me, I do love Friends. I have my Friends Hallmark ornament and my Friends, little itsy bitsies there, figurines of them. So I have seen all of Friends. I love Friends. So I am very much familiar with their Ross and Rachel, back and forth. To me, I think Ross and Rachel's relationship was very toxic. Of course, everybody wanted them together, but their on and off times were really kind of abusive and toxic, the way Ross treated Rachel and the way Rachel and Ross were sometimes together and even apart. So if the writers are trying to have Kat and Elliot's relationship look like Ross and Rachel's on Friends, then we're going to see a lot of ups and downs, right? So, I love Chandler and Monica on Friends too. So, I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying I've heard that as a theory, like, oh, if you like Friends, Kat and Elliot or Ross and Rachel. So I hope not, because like I said, I think Ross and Rachel were really toxic at times, and I'm seeing Kat and Elliot be toxic. So I see the similarities. I just hope that it's better for the both of them. Maybe Kat needs to be alone or with Thomas, and maybe Elliot needs to be with Emma, or maybe they just need to separate for a summer and group back together. I don't know, but I have heard that. So, if you have any thoughts or any theories, definitely leave them in the comments. I thoroughly enjoyed this episode, and I'm so looking forward to the next one. So I will see you then. Bye.